T accounts. You can see why we call it a T account because it looks like a T and it represents an account. So this is showing the T you have here. The left side is for debits and the right side is for credits. So at the top here, you would have the account title, so maybe cash. So that's what a T account would look like. Then all the debits to cash would go over here. All the credits to cash would go over here. The left side of the account is the debit side. The right side of the account is the credit side. So now we can look at the accounting equation and expand it a little bit to incorporate T accounts to show us which categories are increased with a debit or increased with a credit and the opposite of that. So I want you to remember the dealer mnemonic as we look at this. So debits are on the left, credits are on the right. So this is just the mnemonic to remember what increases a debit and what increases a credit. So this is going to be dividends, expenses, assets. Then the accounts that are increased with a credit are liabilities, owner's equity, and revenues. So remembering that dividends, expenses, and assets are increased with a debit, and liabilities, owner's equity, and revenues are increased with a credit, we can look at the components of the equation. So if we're looking at assets, assets are increased with a debit. So we see that in our mnemonic here. Assets are increased with a debit. So that means that they will be decreased with a credit. Those are the only category of accounts that are on the left side of the accounting equation. So notice on the left side of the accounting equation, assets, they are increased with a debit. Now if you look on the other side of the accounting equation, you have liabilities and owner's equity. They are on the right side of the accounting equation. So you can see that they are increased with a credit. And if you look at our mnemonic, you see that liabilities and owner's equity, we can remember that they are increased with a credit. So this mnemonic is very important. Like I said, you'll start to understand things a little more as we do some examples, but I also wanted to understand kind of the reasoning behind that. So assets, remember, they are on the left side of the equation. They are increased with a debit, which is on the left side of the T account. Liabilities and equity are on the right side of the equal sign, and they are increased with a credit, which is on the right side of the T account. One step further. So the only thing that's changing here is this has expanded the equity component. Equity has its own equation within the accounting equation. So we're still looking at assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity. But this is just showing how owner's equity is actually calculated within that category itself. Okay, and we've already talked about the equity calculation before, but now it's just showing this with the T accounts. So equity is made up of common stock minus dividends plus revenues minus expenses. And that is because, remember, common stock and revenues increase equity, but then paying out dividends and paying out expenses decrease equity. So you can look and see what is debited and what is credited of these equity accounts. So we can again draw our T account. That is our mnemonic of dealer. So we have debits on the left, credits on the right. Remember, it's dealer, D-E-A-L-O-R. When we fill in those blanks, on the debit side, D is for dividends, E is for expenses, A is for assets. On the right side, increased with a credit will be L for liabilities, O for owner's equity, and R for revenues. So of the equity accounts in our mnemonic here, we have dividends. Notice they are increased with a debit. So a debit on the left side of the dividends T account will increase dividends and increase equity. The next one we have on the left side is expenses. So debits increase the expense account. However, even though the amounts within those actual accounts would be increasing, overall, these two items actually decrease equity. Then in our mnemonic on the right side, for the things that are increased with a credit, we have liabilities that we already talked about, but the next two are specifically related to equity. So owner's equity itself, and then revenues. So revenues are increased with a credit. You can see that here. So specifically in our mnemonic, the owner's equity on the right side, the O of dealer, you want to remember that owner's equity also incorporates common stock. So common stock will also be increased with a credit.